They do everything in their power to fragment your concentration. They design entire worlds of distraction just to keep your mind divided, your instincts dulled, your energy hijacked. 1,000 blinking lights, 100 voices shouting for your response. It's not accidental. It's architecture. Because a man who learns to control his focus becomes a weapon, not a noisy one, not a chaotic force, but something far more unsettling, calm, silent, exact. He becomes a presence, not a reaction. They're not scared of men who shout. They're terrified of the ones who don't speak but make the entire room move anyway, not with volume, but with gravity. You see, real power doesn't announce itself. It chooses its arena. It selects where to land its attention. And in that selection, something extraordinary happens. Clarity is born, not the kind handed to you by a motivational quote or a passing compliment. No, the clarity carved out through solitude, through discomfort, through choosing discipline over ease. There's a reason they want you scrolling. There's a reason they reward your distractions with tiny hits of dopamine. The man whose mind is constantly pulled in a dozen directions is easy to control, because every notification, every empty argument, every headline engineered to spark emotion, those are threads pulling your attention away from your mission. They don't need chains to imprison you anymore. They use devices, envy, and overstimulation to dissolve your potential piece by piece until there's nothing left but noise pretending to be purpose. But once you reclaim your attention, truly own where your mind goes, you become unpredictable. You stop dancing to the rhythm of external commands. You begin writing your own. And when that shift happens, when you direct your energy like a laser instead of a flashlight, you no longer beg for direction. You become the one others follow, not because you ask them to, but because presence doesn't ask. It commands. That's the power of someone who decides where his focus lives. You'll know you've started to change when silence becomes more valuable than small talk. When solitude no longer feels lonely but sacred. When you begin deleting apps, not because you're angry at the world, but because you're building something it could never understand. Let them think you're distant. Let them misread your silence. That's part of the transformation. They'll call you cold, when really you've just turned down the noise. People don't fear what they can see. They fear what they can't predict. When you're unreadable, when you stop reacting, when you stop explaining every move, you create uncertainty in others. And uncertainty is control. Because now they wonder, they guess, they fill in the blanks with their own insecurities. And meanwhile you're building, quietly, ruthlessly, without the need to be seen. Every moment of stillness is another stone in the wall protecting your sovereignty. The ones who achieve mastery in this life aren't the ones running from conversation to conversation, seeking applause in every room. They're the ones sitting alone at 4 a.m, crafting a future that doesn't need permission, that doesn't crumble under pressure, that doesn't beg to be noticed. You start to see the world differently once you've experienced the power of pulling back. Every interaction becomes a negotiation, every emotion a test. Do you respond and feed their game, or do you hold position and own the board? There will be temptations, endless ones. They'll try to bait you into defending yourself, into proving your intentions, into justifying your path. Don't. Because every time you explain, you chip away at the fortress you're building. Let them question you. Let them invent stories. You owe them nothing. Your energy is not up for grabs. When your thoughts are aligned with your mission, you realize that reacting is just another way to bleed out. And those who trigger easily are easily manipulated. They're emotional marionettes. But the man who watches, who listens longer than expected, who doesn't flinch when provoked, that man is dangerous because his movements are never predictable and his silence is never empty. It's loaded with intent. The moment you stop letting the world dictate your value, everything begins to shift. You're no longer trying to impress. You're no longer molding yourself to fit rooms you've outgrown. You start moving differently. Not out of arrogance, but precision. Your conversations become fewer, but sharper. Your decisions become final, not negotiated, and people will feel that. They'll sense the shift and either respect it or retreat from it. Either way, it's a win. Discipline isn't something you talk about, it's something you live through action, not when everyone's watching, but especially when no one is. Those early mornings, those late nights, those days when motivation is a ghost and all you have is your standard. That's when you separate from the masses. And the truth is, most people don't lack talent. They lack structure. They wait to feel inspired, and that wait becomes their coffin. But the man who builds without applause, who builds while bored, who builds while doubted, he doesn't need cheerleaders. He needs silence, because that's where results are born. Your schedule isn't just about productivity, it's about control. Every task you set, every hour you rule, it's a message to the world. I am unavailable for chaos. Your time is your territory. If you don't defend it, someone else will claim it. That's why you rise early. Not for aesthetics, but because you begin the day on your terms. You start before the world wakes up, and by the time they've opened their eyes, you've already advanced 10 steps. Structure is not restriction, it's power. It's the difference between being pulled by life and leading it. Your routines, your rituals, your refusal to entertain what doesn't serve you, those are the blades you wield in a war most don't even realize they're in. You can't build an empire if your foundation is made of distraction. They'll try to pull you back with familiar voices, friends who once shared your path but now resent your growth, family members who don't understand your silence and demand the old version of you. Let them resist, let them misunderstand, because the man you're becoming doesn't live in the same world they remember. He has outgrown it. And the uncomfortable truth is, most people fear growth because it highlights their stagnation. You don't owe anyone your access. You don't owe them your energy. Your boundaries are not barriers. They are declarations. Statements that say, I am not available to be moved by noise. You don't bend for comfort anymore. You bend for purpose. That's the difference between evolution and performance. One is for legacy. The other is for likes. Most won't understand why you disappeared. They'll think you're lost, when in fact you've just stopped broadcasting. You've chosen substance over spectacle, and that's the death blow to mediocrity, when a man becomes so secure in his silence that even applause sounds like a distraction. You're not avoiding people. You're avoiding their patterns. You're not fleeing connection. You're fleeing confusion. Your circle has narrowed because your clarity has sharpened. There will be days when you're tempted to announce your progress, to prove your transformation. Don't. Let them discover it in your absence. Let them feel the gap you left behind. And when they try to fill it with words, remind them of nothing. Let your absence be the teacher. Let your results speak in ways your mouth never could. You're not in competition with them. You're in competition with who you were yesterday. And each time you resist the temptation to perform for the crowd, you sharpen the blade of your identity. One that doesn't crumble under pressure, doesn't react for validation, doesn't explain every movement. That's how you win. Not loudly, not impulsively, but with clarity, with presence, with surgical stillness. They'll call you many things. Too cold, too quiet, too intense. Let them. Because the man who has mastered his focus no longer requires their understanding. He's not building for them. He's building because there's something within him that refuses to be ordinary. And that thing, that fire, it doesn't scream. It burns. this is only the beginning. When a man chooses to retreat not in fear but in clarity, something within him begins to rearrange. The silence he once avoided becomes a sanctuary. The solitude that used to echo now speaks with direction. He stops needing noise to validate his existence and begins building with the kind of intensity that doesn't require applause to keep going, not because he no longer feels, but because he has learned to separate emotion from execution. Reactivity is no longer his reflex, it becomes a choice. And in that gap between trigger and response, he gains dominion over himself. That gap, so small to the undisciplined, becomes everything to the sovereign. Because in that space lies the power to rewrite fate, to reroute destruction, to hold still while the world burns and walk away untouched. The man who understands that doesn't need to win debates. He doesn't need to prove his worth. He embodies it, and embodiment, unlike performance, cannot be faked. That's why they fear the man who vanishes. Not because he disappeared, but because they don't know who he'll be when he reemerges. They can't predict the version of him that's incubating in that silence. They don't know what he's letting go of, what he's reforging. And that unknown rattles them more than any argument could. Because when a man withdraws into himself with intent, he's not isolating, he's sharpening. There's no fury more precise than the man who's built himself in darkness. No fire more enduring than one stoked in the quiet routine, because he hasn't just removed distraction. He's refined his operating system. He doesn't rush. He doesn't chase. He doesn't even pause to explain his absence. He simply returns when it's time, with a presence that cannot be ignored and a direction no one can derail. He's no longer triggered by shallow judgments. He's not wounded by the misunderstandings of surface minds. The storms that once pulled him under now crash against the walls he's built in disciplined repetition. Because when you master your emotional architecture, nothing outside you holds the power to break what you fortified inside. He doesn't wait to be noticed. He doesn't seek eyes. He crafts results so heavy they shift the atmosphere of every room he enters, not because of charisma, but because his energy is the residue of relentless refinement. When he speaks, it's with purpose. When he acts, it's with certainty. And when he's silent, the air tightens. People begin to notice the absence before they realize what it meant. They try to recall the old version of him, the one who replied, who reacted, who engaged in games of validation. But he's no longer that man. That version was sacrificed in cold mornings and quiet evenings, in routines no one praised, in choices that felt like isolation, but were actually initiation. And now he doesn't waver. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't soften to be understood, because when you've built from nothing, when you've risen through the layers of your own weakness, you no longer crave sympathy. You crave edge, you crave precision, and you defend your energy like it's a throne. The room adjusts when he enters, not because he commands it, but because his presence has been earned in arenas where no one clapped. His success is not a coincidence. It's the compounded interest of days stacked with relentless structure, with focus weaponized, with distractions gutted from his reality. He's not better than others. He's just no longer available to their chaos. They'll say he's changed, become robotic, unemotional. But those words come from mouths unacquainted with discipline. He hasn't become less human. He's become more aligned, more exact, more immune to the sugar-coated poisons that steal years from men in exchange for momentary praise. And when he looks in the mirror, he doesn't see someone waiting. He sees someone arriving. He walks now not with noise but with command. Not because he owns others, but because he owns himself. His reactions are few, but his movements are devastatingly effective. He lets the world speak while he listens. He lets others burn out in overexposure while he fuels a silent empire behind the curtain. And when he reveals it, it will not need introduction. It will demand respect through the sheer weight of what it represents. Others may question his methods, his detachment, his silence, but that's because they misunderstand the source of his fire. It doesn't come from attention, it comes from vision. And vision doesn't need echo chambers, it needs clarity. So he turns down the volume, not because he's running, but because he's tuned into something deeper than words. This is what separates the ruler from the follower, not status, not talent, but discipline fused with stillness. The ability to delay noise in exchange for control, to delay reaction in favor of strategy. Because power isn't seized in outbursts. It's earned through relentless internal command. And the man who has mastered himself can never be owned by another. So when they scream, he listens. When they provoke, he processes. When they expect chaos, he delivers calm. And that contradiction, their noise crashing against his stillness, that's what breaks their grip. Not violence, not volume, but the unsettling realization that they have no influence over him anymore. He becomes the variable they can't predict, the piece they can't manipulate, and in that confusion, he wins quietly, completely, irreversibly. His circle changes, not out of arrogance, but necessity. The higher he climbs, the fewer frequencies match his. He doesn't resent the past. He just refuses to be pulled backward by it. His boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They separate distraction from mission, noise from message, temporary from timeless. There will be whispers, accusations of coldness, of arrogance, but they'll never see the rituals that forged him, the days he felt empty and showed up anyway, the nights when the world partied while he prepared. They see the outcome, not the process, and that's fine. Let them judge results they didn't help create. Because the man who has walked through fire doesn't fear the opinions of those who only stood close enough to feel the heat. There is an elegance to the man who no longer explains, a ruthlessness in the one who builds without asking. He doesn't broadcast his intentions because he doesn't need permission to manifest them. His time is no longer spent convincing people, it's spent executing. He's not quick to respond, because silence is a tool, stillness is a shield, and clarity is a sword. Together, they form a fortress no outside voice can penetrate. He has removed the leash of approval, and in doing so, has unshackled himself from the invisible prisons others die in without ever realizing they were caged. The leash wasn't around their necks. It was inside their minds, tethered to likes, to praise, to recognition. But he knows now, validation is a cheap substitute for self-respect. So he honors his time like royalty, wastes no motion, measures every word, trains not for attention, but for impact. There is no urgency to be seen. Because when your presence is potent, your absence is a statement. And when people notice the gap you left behind, they realize what they took for granted. The man who gave too much, responded too quickly, explained too often, that man has evolved. And now when he speaks, the silence beforehand echoes louder than any sentence. They try to bait him back into old habits. They dangle gossip, conflict, drama. But his appetite has changed. He no longer feeds on chaos. He feeds on clarity. And his hunger now is for mastery, not over others, but over himself. Because the war he wages isn't against people. It's against the man he used to be. And every disciplined morning is a strike against that version. Every refusal to react is a blow to that old identity. Every moment of focus is a step toward becoming unbreakable. Eventually, they'll stop calling him cold. They'll start calling him consistent. They'll stop labeling him distant. They'll start calling him dependable. They'll stop mocking his silence. They'll start listening to his results, because nothing commands respect like a man who no longer requires it. He doesn't flex, he doesn't posture, he doesn't threaten. He simply shows up again and again like gravity, unavoidable, immovable, undeniable. That's the final form. Not someone who tries to impress, but someone who cannot be dismissed. He isn't loud because he doesn't need to be. He doesn't react because he's already calculated the consequences. He doesn't chase because what's meant to align will never require pursuit. So now he walks alone, not out of loneliness, but because his path no longer fits the crowd. He's not trying to escape them. He's rising beyond them. And from that vantage point, the world looks different, not because it changed, but because he did.